When the 8th century opened, the wind that once carried the banners of empire was gentle again. The roaring power of the Turks had fallen silent, and in their place new riders appeared. The Uyghurs, masters of diplomacy and of words as much as war. They ruled the grasslands north of China, where rivers vanished into the steppe and herds of horses shimmered in the heat. Their Khagans were not destroyers but mediators. They kept peace between tribes, guarded the Silk Road, and learned to trade with gold instead of blood. Their capital, Ordubalik, was a miracle of its time. Walls of timber and clay, markets filled with Persian glass and Chinese silk, streets alive with the hum of 1,000 tongues. Here East met West without sword or siege. The Uyghurs had taken to the strange dualist faith of Manichaeism, worshipping the eternal battle between light and darkness. Their temples glowed at dusk with colored lamps and murals of winged spirits. Priests copied sacred scrolls on silk. Merchants bowed before altars before setting out across the desert. They were a people who believed that to trade was to serve the light. Beyond their lands, the Tibetans had forged an empire among the mountains, fierce and high as their homeland. Their armies rode down into the valleys of China and Central Asia, clashing with the Tang. Yet even as they fought, they learned. From India came the teachings of Buddha, and Tibetan scribes carved new alphabets into stone so that their people could preserve the words of wisdom. From this age of conquest grew a civilization of monasteries, prayer flags, and endless sky. The Tang Empire, though bruised by rebellion, still stood like an ancient cedar tree. Caravans left the city of Chang'an each morning, camels heavy with silk, paper, and porcelain. They followed the desert tracks to Samarkand, to Merv, to Baghdad. Along these routes drifted perfumes, spices, and songs. A Persian lute might be heard in a Chinese tavern. A Buddhist monk might study astronomy beside an Arab mathematician. And the Silk Road was not one path but a web, a living network of faiths, colors, and languages. At its heart beat the idea that exchange itself was sacred. As the Tang weakened, the merchants and monks became the real conquerors of distance. They built small oasis kingdoms, Kocha, Khotan, Dunhuang, each a pearl strung along the trade routes. In caves outside Dunhuang, artists painted entire worlds on sandstone walls. The enlightened being Avalokiteshvara, kings offering lotus flowers, travelers under starlight. When storms buried the road, pilgrims waited there, praying for the wind to calm. Centuries later, their murals would still whisper of those nights when the desert was alive with human breath. To the west, in the oasis of Transoxiana, new powers rose. Persian, Arab, and Turkic peoples mingled, founding cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, names that would one day shine again under the Mongols. For now they were crossroads where paper from China met ink from the Caliphate. Scribes wrote in 3 scripts on 1 page, and mosques stood beside Buddhist shrines. The world was not divided yet, it was curious. Southward, the Indian Ocean carried the same spirit. Dhows with triangular sails left the harbors of Basra and Calicut, steering by the stars towards Ceylon and Sumatra. Their holds were filled with cloves, pepper, ivory, and sandalwood. The wind that moved them, the monsoon, was as dependable as fate itself, half the year eastward, half the year westward. Because of that rhythm, traders could leave home knowing they would return, and across the sea grew a quiet trust between civilizations. By the 9th century the Uyghurs had fallen, scattered by the Kyrgyz. Yet the peace they had kept did not vanish. From their memory remained the idea that the steppe could serve not only conquest but connection. New tribes inherited their roads, the Karluks, the Khitans, the Tanguts, each taking a fragment of the old order, each writing their own law in the dust. The steppe was a vast palimpsest, one empire erased, another written on top. In this 1,000-mile belt of grass and sand, men still measured wealth by horses and honor by hospitality. When night fell, the yurts glowed like lanterns, and elders told stories that traveled farther than any army. They spoke of a time when the sky itself had chosen rulers, when the Khan's tent was the center of the world. Those legends, carried from mouth to mouth, would one day ignite again. But for now the steppe slept, dreaming of a boy yet unborn. And beyond it, in every direction, Asia was stirring. The last Tang poets were writing verses about fallen leaves and lost loves. In Bengal, monks were copying sutras by lamplight. In Kyoto, courtiers brushed ink across scrolls while the moon rose over silent ponds. Everywhere there was movement, but it was not the movement of war, it was the slow heartbeat of civilization. The age of steel would come later. For now the continent belonged to scholars, sailors and traders, to those who built bridges instead of walls. Their legacy would not vanish even when fire returned to the horizon. When the fires of rebellion dimmed and the Tang dynasty drew its final breath, China stood at a crossroads between ruin and rebirth. Its empire, once radiant as the morning sun, had cracked under its own weight. The An Lushan rebellion had drained its strength, and in the chaos that followed, soldiers became warlords, and provinces became kingdoms. The once unified heart of the Middle Kingdom fractured into pieces, but the soul of its civilization remained intact. Even in decline, the Tang left behind a legacy of beauty so vast that the centuries after it could not help but bloom again. From its ashes rose one of history's most remarkable ages, the era of Song China, where power shifted from generals to scholars, and the sword gave way to the brush. It was a new idea of greatness, not built on conquest but on intellect, invention and the quiet dignity of learning. In the year 960 the general Zhao Guanyin seized power and founded the Song dynasty. He was weary of war and dreamed of peace built through governance, art and reason. He surrounded himself not with soldiers but with thinkers, poets, philosophers, engineers and calligraphers. In the new capital of Kaifeng, the air hummed not with the clang of armor, but with the scratch of brushes on paper. Kaifeng became the beating heart of an urban civilization centuries ahead of its time. Its markets opened before dawn, its streets gleamed with lanterns after dark. Food vendors shouted the names of steaming dishes, dumplings, noodles, rice cakes, while musicians played bamboo flutes by the canal. Money flowed like water, not in gold or silver, but in paper, for the Song invented the first true banknotes. And in that exchange of ink and trust lay the seed of modern economy. The Song were not conquerors, yet their minds conquered distance. They mapped the stars and the seas. They turned humble materials into miracles. The compass, which gave direction to sailors, gunpowder, which would soon change war forever, and movable type printing, which allowed books to multiply like blossoms in spring. A single scholar could hold in his hands the wisdom of centuries, printed on thin rice paper, carried from one province to another. Knowledge became a river that no dam could stop. The age of the Song was an age of subtlety. Its artists painted not the glory of kings, but the silence of mountains. On wide silk scrolls, rivers wound through mist. and solitary figures gazed at waterfalls that seemed to fall forever. They were not scenes of conquest but of contemplation, reflections of a civilization that had turned inward, seeking peace in nature's rhythm. In the same spirit, Confucianism was reborn, not as a dry ritual, but as philosophy renewed by the breath of the cosmos. Thinkers like Zhu Xi taught that moral harmony mirrored the order of the universe, that every stone and stream carried its own virtue. It was called Neo-Confucianism, a belief that combined reason with reverence. It spread to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, shaping minds far beyond China's borders. Buddhism still thrived too, especially in the mountains and monasteries where monks copied sutras and brewed tea in silence. And in tea itself the Chinese found poetry. Green leaves steeped in hot water became a ritual of calm, a moment of balance between heaven and earth. In time, even the smallest gestures, the pouring of tea, the stroke of a brush, the folding of a robe, were seen as reflections of the greater harmony of things. But the Song were not only philosophers and painters, they built a world that belonged to the common man as well. Kaifeng and Hangzhou were the largest cities on earth, buzzing with merchants, artisans, and entertainers. Street theaters performed comedies for crowds of hundreds. Bookstores sold illustrated romances. Bridges arched over canals lined with willow trees. Travelers wrote of streetlights shining so bright that one could read at midnight. The government recorded births, built schools, managed irrigation, and measured harvests with precision. They even created a civil service exam system, so vast that a peasant's son, if gifted enough, might rise to govern the empire. The exams were grueling, years of study on ancient texts, but they forged a meritocracy unseen elsewhere in the medieval world. In the West, knights inherited their titles by blood. In China, scholars earned theirs by ink. Yet the Song's brilliance came with a shadow. While they cultivated wisdom, their armies withered. The Liao, Western Xia, and later the Jurchen states pressed against their borders, demanding tribute and threatening their lands. The Song emperors, confident in diplomacy and wealth, believed they could buy peace forever. But beyond the Great Wall, a different logic ruled, the logic of the steppe, where peace was only the pause between storms. Meanwhile, China's inventions sailed far beyond its shores. Arab traders carried compasses and paper to the Middle East. Korean artisans refined movable types. Japanese monks returned from China with books, architecture, and the practice of Zen. Southeast Asian kings sent ambassadors with gifts of ivory, pearls, and parrots. The Song fleet, one of the largest of its time, patrolled the South China Sea, its ships powered by sails and organized by strict code. Chinese merchants reached the islands of the Philippines and Indonesia, bringing porcelain that glimmered like moonlight. Even as its borders shrank, China's cultural influence expanded farther than ever before. It was no longer an empire of armies but of ideas, and those ideas would outlast every dynasty. By the late 1100s, the balance was changing again. The Jin dynasty ruling from the north forced the Song to abandon Kaifeng and retreat south to Hangzhou. There they built a new capital, Linan, a city of canals and gardens that Marco Polo would one day call the finest on earth. But the Song were now divided, their glory dimmed. While scholars debated philosophy and poets wrote of distant autumns, new horsemen were gathering on the horizon. Their drums could not yet be heard in the valleys of China, but the sky above the steppe was beginning to darken. In the peaceful courts of Hangzhou, Nobles strolled among lotus ponds and admired the paintings of misty hills. Fishermen cast their nets into silver water. Monks tended to tea gardens on the slopes of sacred mountains. It was a world too beautiful to last, one that believed intellect could outshine war. But the wind from the north carried a whisper of hooves, faint, distant, inevitable. The Mongols were still children, herding goats under the blue sky, but in the century to come they would awaken, and all the art, the wisdom and the calm of Song China would face a trial unlike any before. For now, though, the lamps of civilization still burned bright. The world slept in golden peace, unaware of how brief the dream would be. While the Middle Kingdom looked inward to philosophy and art, farther south the subcontinent turned its gaze to the ocean. Between the 8th and 12th centuries, India was not a single realm but a mosaic, a continent of colors, creeds and kingdoms. Each valley and coastline carried its own story, yet all were tied together by faith, trade and the slow rhythm of the monsoon. In the misty plains of Bengal, the Pala Empire blossomed first. Its rulers were patrons of compassion and knowledge, guarding the last sanctuaries of Buddhism in India. The monasteries of Nalanda and Vikramashila were like small cities, filled with courtyards, libraries and gardens of whispering bamboo. Students from Tibet, Nepal and even distant China traveled barefoot for months to study there. They debated the nature of existence under banyan trees, carved prayer wheels from sandalwood, and at night read from palm-leaf manuscripts by the light of flickering oil lamps. Inside Nalanda's walls, knowledge flowed like a sacred river. Astronomy, medicine, grammar, and philosophy, all were treated as paths toward enlightenment. When the wind rustled through the tall grasses outside, it sounded almost like chanting. It was a peaceful age, though fragile, for power in India was forever shifting. In the west rose the Rashtrakutas of Deccan, in the south the Cholas, and in the north the Rajput clans built fortresses on the desert hills of Rajasthan. In the dry lands where sand met stone, the Rajputs lived by codes as old as their swords. They sang of honor, loyalty, and love that outlasted death. Their forts crowned the cliffs of Chittor and Jaisalmer, glowing gold at sunset. From these citadels they fought endless wars, not always for conquest but for pride, for the right to exist under open sky. Poets called them lion-hearted. When an enemy breached their gates, the women performed jauhar, walking into sacred fire rather than face capture, while the men rode out one last time, their armor shining like dawn. It was tragedy and glory woven together, the spirit of a people who would bend to no master. Far to the south, the Chola dynasty rose from the fertile plains of the Kaveri River. Their kings were sailors and temple builders, merchants and conquerors. They ruled not only by land but by sea, their ships stretching the empire's reach across the Indian Ocean. From the 11th century onward, their fleets sailed eastward to Sri Lanka, the Maldives, and even Sumatra and Malaya. They left behind inscriptions in distant ports, proof that Indian mariners knew the world long before Europe's explorers were born. The Cholas believed that art was worship. In the great temple of Brihadiswara and Tanjavur, stone rose toward the heavens in perfect balance. Bronze sculptors cast graceful images of Shiva Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, his hair a circle of flame, his smile calm and eternal. Each figure captured the rhythm of creation and destruction, the heartbeat of the universe itself. Their rule was orderly and prosperous. The king was seen as guardian of Dharma, the cosmic law. Taxes from farmers and traders filled the temples with gold, and irrigation channels turned dry land green. Under the Chola administration, villages ran themselves with consuls and written records, a rare achievement in the medieval world. But the Cholas' greatest strength lay in their mastery of the sea. They understood the monsoon winds, sailing with them to the east and returning when they changed. The ocean was not a barrier but a bridge, and across it spread India's culture, religion and language. This was also an age of spiritual flowering. Hinduism, long intertwined with local traditions, evolved through devotion, the Bhakti movement. Saint poets like Appar, Sundarar and Andal sang not to distant gods but to beloved deities who walked among people. Their hymns echoed through temples and rice fields, turning worship into song and daily life into prayer. The idea that love itself could lead to liberation spread from Tamil lands to the north, reshaping India's soul. Buddhism, meanwhile, was drifting eastward. From Bengal's monasteries, monks carried scriptures to Tibet and China, where they would be translated, reimagined, and preserved. In India, it slowly gave way to the resurgent faiths of Shiva and Vishnu, yet its spirit endured. In art, in ethics, in the quiet compassion woven through Indian thought. Across the ocean, the Srivijaya Empire of Sumatra was thriving. Its ports linked India and China, serving as rest stops for merchants and monks alike. The Srivijayan kings welcomed scholars from Nalanda and sent their own envoys back with gifts of spices and ivory. In their capital of Palembang, the air smelled of cloves and the sound of temple bells mingled with the creak of ships. Farther north, on the mainland, the Khmer Empire was beginning to rise, absorbing Indian art and language until Sanskrit words echoed in its palaces. The ocean had become a mirror of India's influence, its reflection shimmering on every shore. Beyond temples and kingdoms, ordinary life in medieval India carried its own poetry. Potters shaped earthen lamps, farmers chanted as they planted rice, and women painted their doorways with patterns of rice flour to invite good fortune. Children learned stories of Rama and Krishna from traveling storytellers who beat small drums to call a crowd. The scent of jasmine drifted through the night. The river flowed beneath silver moonlight. Even in hardship there was grace. The rhythms of day and night, of monsoon and dry season, gave life a pulse as ancient as time itself. By the late 12th century, winds were shifting again. New powers rose in the northwest. First Turkic warlords, then the Ghurids, whose advance would plant the seeds of the Delhi Sultanate. The Palas had fallen, the Cholas had begun to fade, but their legacy of learning, art, and maritime vision remained etched across Asia. Even as armies gathered in the passes of Afghanistan, merchants still set sail from Calicut and Nagapattinam, and poets still sang beneath the southern stars. For half a millennium, India had been less a kingdom than a civilization, united not by one ruler but by shared imagination. Its temples, ships, and songs had carried that imagination far beyond its shores, weaving India into the wider fabric of the world. And as the year 1200 approached, the winds that once carried trade began to carry change. Far to the north, the riders of the steppe were stirring, a force that would soon reshape the destinies of every land beneath the Asian sky. Far from the deserts and mountain passes of the north, the southern half of Asia was a world of water, a labyrinth of islands, deltas, and green peninsulas wrapped in mist. Here the monsoon ruled all things. It arrived like a heartbeat, steady and eternal, bringing life, trade, and stories from every direction. Between 800 and 1200 AD, kingdoms rose among palms and mangroves, glowing like lanterns upon the sea. In the center of the Indonesian archipelago lay Srivijaya, the Empire of the Straits. From its capital at Palembang on Sumatra, it watched the narrow channels through which every ship from India or China must pass. The Srivijayan kings ruled not by land but by tide. Their fleets were swift, their harbors safe, their pilots masters of the stars and winds. Gold, camphor, cloves, ivory, all flowed through their ports, and every vessel paid tribute before it dared the open sea. Yet Srivijaya was more than a marketplace. It was a sanctuary of Buddhism, a refuge for scholars after the fall of Nalanda. Monks studied Sanskrit and Pali. They carved wooden images of Avalokiteshvara, the enlightened being with many arms, to guard sailors on dangerous voyages. Temples rose amid tropical trees, their bells echoing over river and mangrove. When foreign pilgrims arrived, drenched from the monsoon, they were given food, robes, and the sound of chanting. To live in Srivijaya was to live between sea and sky, trusting both. Northward, beyond the Gulf of Siam, another realm was shaping itself, the Khmer Empire of Cambodia. In its early centuries it drew power from rice, rivers, and gods that seemed to walk beside men. The Khmers believed their king was divine, a bridge between heaven and earth, so they built cities to mirror the cosmos. Moats for oceans, towers for mountains, causeways for the paths of the sun. The greatest of these was Angkor Wat. Begun in the early 12th century under King Suryavarman II, 5 towers rose like lotus buds above a sea of stone, their carvings alive with myth, gods churning the ocean of milk, warriors locked in endless battle, apsaras dancing on clouds. When dawn spilled across the temple, the sandstone turned gold, and the reflection in the moat seemed another world beneath this one. Around Angkor stretched reservoirs and canals so vast they could feed 500,000 souls. Engineers mapped the seasons as carefully as priests mapped the stars. Water was their empire's blood, faith its breath. For centuries the city thrived, its avenues shaded by sugar palms and its shrines perfumed with incense. Then, when the rains changed and the enemies pressed from the west, Angkor began to fade into the forest. But the forest, merciful and slow, kept it safe. Even today, its roots hold the temples in a green embrace, as if nature herself were remembering. To the west, along the Irrawaddy River, rose the kingdom of Pagan, the cradle of Myanmar. Its kings ruled from a plain shimmering with thousands of stupas, meaning religious monuments. From the year 1050 onward, they built temples by the hundreds, each one a prayer in brick and gold. Pilgrims climbed their terraces to watch the sunrise spill over the river, bathing the land in amber light. Under King Anavrata, Buddhism became the soul of Pagan. Monks carried scriptures written on palm leaves. Artists painted the lives of the Buddha on cool plaster walls. Markets thrived, and merchants from Bengal and China met under canopies of woven bamboo. From the heights of Shwedagon Pagoda, the king could look across the plain and see not a battlefield but a horizon filled with faith. Each spire pointed upward, a reminder that even dust could reach heaven through devotion. East of Pagan, the lands that would become Thailand began to stir. The Thai peoples moved south from the mountains, blending with Mon and Khmer cultures. By the 12th century they had founded walled towns along the Menam River, trading rice, salt and elephants. Their future capital, Ayutthaya, was still centuries away, yet the spirit that would define it, grace, balance and tolerance, was already forming. From India came the stories of Rama, from China the art of porcelain and poetry. The Siamese combined them all, creating something unmistakably their own, a kingdom at peace with the world, built on the rhythm of the rains. Farther east, among countless islands and coral seas, lived the ancestors of the Filipino and Polynesian peoples. Sailors who read the waves as others read books. They built outrigger canoes that could cross oceans guided only by stars, wind and birds. Their world was not divided by water, it was united by it. Villages traded obsidian, shells and rice. Chiefs ruled by generosity rather than conquest. In time they would meet the traders of Srivijaya and the Chinese junks that drifted south, and the old maritime web of Asia would stretch even farther, linking village to empire, island to continent. Daily life in these lands followed the monsoon. When the rains came, fields turned into mirrors reflecting the sky. When they left, the air smelled of smoke and fruit. Women wove silk in stilt houses above flooded ground. Children ran through temples chasing butterflies. Musicians played bamboo zithers, while fishermen mended nets by lantern light. The nights were warm, full of cicadas and slow laughter. Everywhere nature was both god and companion. Kings built temples to honor it. Peasants whispered thanks before planting a seed. The jungle could devour cities, but it also fed them. A reminder that creation and destruction were never enemies, only partners in the same eternal dance. By the end of the 12th century, the entire tropical half of Asia had become a single breathing organism of trade and faith. Indian ships carried Sanskrit and bronze, Chinese fleets brought silk and porcelain, Arab sailors brought mathematics, astronomy and the call to prayer. At every harbor the languages mixed like currents, Tamil beside Malay, Arabic beside Pali. Spices, stories and ideas moved faster than armies ever could. When travelers from the north reached these shores, they found kingdoms rich without arrogance, powerful without cruelty. Srivijaya, Pagan, Angkor, each glowed with a quiet confidence, a belief that balance was strength. They were worlds of harmony, still untouched by the storms that would soon roll from the steppe. And somewhere, far away under the blue vault of the Mongolian sky, a new power was gathering its breath. The southern seas slept in sunlight, unaware that the coming century would bring the sound of hooves across every horizon. At the far edge of the continent, where the mountains fall into the sea and the morning sun first touches the world, two nations shaped by beauty and discipline were writing their own chapters of the medieval age, Japan and Korea. Here the air smelled of pine and salt, the seasons ruled with quiet precision, snow fell softly in winter, cherry blossoms rained in spring, and the sea shimmered like a mirror in summer. While empires rose and fell elsewhere, the islands of the East cultivated something rarer than power, serenity. In the year 794, Japan's emperor moved his capital to Heian-kyo, the city of peace and tranquility. Today it is known as Kyoto, but in that time it was a dream made of symmetry and light. Streets ran straight and wide, modeled after China's Chang'an, yet quieter, more restrained. The court of Heian was a world of color and refinement, where the brush was sharper than the blade. Aristocrats wore layered silk robes dyed in subtle hues, the green of new bamboo, the grey of distant rain. They perfumed their sleeves, wrote poems in reply to love letters, and painted fans with images of moonlit rivers. To live beautifully was to live well. In Heian, elegance was law. Within this cocoon of grace, a new voice emerged, a woman's voice. Writers like Murasaki Shikibu and Sei Shonagon created works that would outlast dynasties. Murasaki's Tale of Genji told of love and impermanence. Sei's Pillow Book captured the smallest joys of daily life: the sound of rain on the roof, the scent of incense, the melancholy of autumn twilight. Their words became the heart of Japanese literature, whispered across 1,000 years. But outside the capital's painted screens, the world was changing. In the countryside, warriors were rising, men who measured worth not in poetry but in courage. They were the samurai, loyal to local lords known as daimyo, bound by duty, skill, and silence. At first they guarded estates, later they began to shape history itself. By the 12th century, two great clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, stood locked in rivalry. Their conflict, known as the Genpei War, would end the Heian peace forever. For 5 years, Japan became a stage of fire and foam. Battles on beaches, castles ablaze, samurai banners reflected in the waves. When it ended in 1185, the Minamoto had triumphed, and a new government rose at Kamakura, under Minamoto no Yoritomo, the first shogun. Power shifted from the imperial court to the warrior's camp. Yet even in this transition, Japan's spirit of refinement endured. The samurai, though born of war, adopted the grace of the poets they replaced. They valued discipline, composure, and the quiet acceptance of fate, the seeds of the code that would later be called Bushido. In the temples of Kyoto, monks continued to chant. In Kamakura, new schools of Zen Buddhism arrived from China, teaching that enlightenment could be found not through books but through silence. A monk might spend years tending a garden, arranging stones to echo the flow of rivers. A single brushstroke could reveal the universe. Even amid the clang of swords, Japan sought balance. Across the narrow sea, the Korean peninsula followed its own steady rhythm. The unified Silla kingdom, born in the 600s, had brought centuries of peace. By 900, its strength was fading, and the land divided into 3 rival states. But from their struggle rose a new dynasty, Goryeo. Its name would echo through time, becoming the root of the modern word Korea. The Goryeo kings ruled from their capital at Gaegyeong, where palaces stood beside mountains and scholars recited Confucian classics in tranquil courtyards. Buddhism flourished here as deeply as in Tibet or Japan. Monks built towering pagodas of granite, carved wooden statues of bodhisattvas with gentle smiles, and filled the air with the sound of bells that could be heard for miles. Faith was not only prayer, it was art. During this age, Korea achieved wonders of craftsmanship. The Tripitaka Koreana, a complete collection of Buddhist scriptures carved into more than 80,000 wooden blocks, was created at Haeinsa Temple. Each character was perfect, each stroke even, the work of generations who believed that precision was devotion. Korean artisans also discovered the beauty of Celadon porcelain, jade green pottery so smooth it seemed to glow from within. Vases shaped like lotus buds and cranes became prized across Asia, admired even in the courts of the Song emperors. And like their neighbors, the Koreans valued learning. Their civil service exams mirrored those of China, but their spirit was gentler, a blend of scholarship and harmony. When envoys from distant lands visited, They spoke of Korea as a realm of courtesy and calm. From Kyoto to Gyeonggi, the eastern world of this era shared more than trade. It shared a philosophy that life's meaning lay not in conquest but in refinement. Where Europe raised cathedrals of stone, the East cultivated temples of silence and wood, open to wind and moonlight. A poem, a tea ceremony, a curve of a roof, these became sacred gestures, ways to touch eternity without disturbing it. Artists carved scenes of cranes, waves, and pine trees, symbols of purity and endurance. Music flowed from bamboo flutes. Ink painting replaced sculpture. Simplicity became the highest art. To watch falling snow, to pour tea with grace, to breathe in rhythm with the seasons, this was the civilization of the Far East. By the end of the 12th century, all of East Asia seemed at peace. China, though threatened, still glowed under the Southern Song. Japan had found balance between emperor and shogun. Korea prospered in trade and tranquility. Across the seas from the Philippines to the islands of Java, merchants exchanged gifts and stories. Yet the horizon was darkening. In the far north, under the vast Mongolian sky, a young man named Temujin was gathering the tribes. He was still unknown to the world, but the wind already carried whispers of his destiny. Soon his armies would thunder across the plains, and the stillness of 1,000 temples would tremble at the echo of hooves. For now, though, the night is peaceful. The stars hang bright above Kyoto, their reflections dancing in the temple ponds. A Korean monk finishes carving a prayer into wood. Somewhere in the dark a samurai sharpens his blade, not knowing he is standing on the edge of history. The lamps of Asia burn gently, their light drifting toward a dawn that will change everything. The world sleeps, unaware that the age of scholars is ending, and the age of conquerors is about to begin.